The rain hammered against marble floors as an elderly black man in a tattered coat stepped into the most exclusive bank in the city, and the millionaire in the $1,000 suit couldn't help but laugh, because surely this was some kind of joke, right? Security reached for their radios while the receptionist pointed dismissively toward the ATM outside. But the old man simply stood there with the kind of calm that comes from knowing something no one else does. And when he quietly asked to check his balance and slid forward a weathered black card that made her hands tremble, the laughter began to die, because what they were about to discover would shatter everything they thought they knew about wealth, power, and the invisible man who had sacrificed everything to expose a truth that destroyed thousands while building fortunes. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday morning, turning the streets of downtown into rivers of gray. Inside the Wellstone Private Banking Center, everything gleamed. Marble floors stretched like frozen lakes beneath crystal chandeliers. Glass walls revealed executive offices where men and women in $1,000 suits moved with the quiet confidence of people who never worried about their next meal. At 7:45, the automatic doors whispered open. A figure stepped inside, and the world seemed to pause. He was black, elderly, late 70s at least, with a face that carried the weight of too many hard winters. His coat hung loose on his frame, patched at the elbows, soaked through from the storm. His pants were too short, revealing worn shoes that had walked miles nobody in this building could imagine. His hands trembled slightly as he steadied himself against the doorframe, catching his breath. Water dripped from his shoulders onto the pristine floor. Marcus Reynolds, head of security, noticed him immediately. He'd worked this lobby for 12 years and developed an instinct for people who didn't belong. He caught the eye of his partner, David, stationed near the elevators. No words needed, just a slight nod. The old man took a few hesitant steps forward, his eyes scanning the vast space. Everything here whispered money. The leather furniture, the abstract art worth more than most cars, the hushed conversations about portfolios and investment strategies. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman named Jennifer sat behind a sleek computer terminal. She was mid-20s, professionally dressed, her smile practiced and bright. That smile faltered when she looked up. "Excuse me, miss," the old man said softly. His voice surprised her. It was clear, measured, educated. Not what she expected from someone who looked like he'd spent the night on a bench. "Could you tell me where I might check my balance?" Jennifer's fingers froze over her keyboard. She glanced past him toward Marcus, who was already moving closer, his hand near his radio. "Sir," she began, her training kicking in, "there's an ATM just outside the main entrance. It's accessible 24 hours. "No." The old man shook his head gently. "I need to speak with someone inside. A banker, please." Jennifer's smile became more strained. "Sir, this is a private banking center. We serve clients by appointment only. Perhaps if you visit one of our retail branches downtown." "I'm a client." The words hung in the air, impossible and awkward. Behind him, someone laughed. Trevor Blackwood had been standing near the coffee station, scrolling through his phone while waiting for his relationship manager. He was 43, wearing a navy suit that cost more than most monthly salaries, his hair styled with the casual perfection of someone who paid attention to details. He'd made his first million in tech before 30 and hadn't stopped climbing since. "Sorry," Trevor said, not sounding sorry at all. "Did he just say he's a client here?" His voice carried across the lobby. A few other people looked up, executives waiting for morning meetings, a lawyer reviewing documents in one of the leather chairs, a businesswoman adjusting her briefcase. The old man didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Jennifer. "I understand this is unusual," he said quietly, "but I would appreciate your help." Trevor walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble. No, this is great. Really. I love what you guys are doing with outreach. Very progressive." He grinned at Jennifer. "Are charity hours open now? Because I didn't get the memo." A few people snickered. The businesswoman looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Marcus reached the reception desk, his presence imposing. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. This facility requires." I'm not here to cause trouble, the old man interrupted gently. He still hadn't raised his voice. I simply need to check my balance. That's all, right? Trevor said, leaning against the desk with the casualness of someone completely comfortable in his power. And I need to check if I'm secretly Batman, but we don't always get what we want. More laughter. Even Jennifer couldn't help a small smile, though she tried to hide it. The old man looked down at his trembling hands. For a moment, something flickered across his face, not anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of scene he'd witnessed too many times before. I understand how this looks, he said. I know what you see when you look at me. Do you? Trevor stepped closer, invading the old man's space with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. Because what I see is someone who's confused about where he is. This isn't a shelter, Grandpa. This isn't the mission down on 5th Street. This is where people who actually have money come to manage it. David, the second security guard, joined Marcus. They flanked the old man now, a silent message about what came next. The old man reached slowly into his coat pocket. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his belt. Easy, Marcus warned. I'm just getting my card, the old man said calmly. He pulled out a wallet. Leather, old but once expensive. The kind that lasts decades if you take care of it. He opened it carefully and removed a card, sliding it across the desk toward Jennifer. The card was black, scratched. The logo had worn away almost completely. Jennifer picked it up, frowning. She'd never seen anything like it. The material felt different, heavier than modern cards, the edges worn smooth by time. There were no visible numbers, no name printed on the front. She turned it over. Nothing. Sir, this card doesn't have any. She stopped mid-sentence. Trevor leaned over to look. What? What is it? Jennifer held the card up to the light. They're barely visible, were numbers embossed so faintly they were almost invisible. And something else, a small mark in the corner. A symbol she'd seen in training materials, but never in person. Her hand started to shake. One moment, please, she whispered. She inserted the card into her reader, her fingers fumbling slightly. The system prompted her for the account number. She typed in the embossed digits carefully, double-checking each one. The screen went blank. Then it flashed red. Access restricted. Executive authorization required. Trevor saw the screen and laughed louder. Oh, this is perfect. The card doesn't even work. Buddy, where'd you get this? A pawn shop? The dumpster behind. Please. Jennifer interrupted, her voice suddenly tight. Please just wait. Something in her tone made Trevor pause. The old man remained standing, patient. He didn't look anxious. He didn't look defeated. He looked like someone waiting for a bus he knew would eventually arrive. I'll be right back, Jennifer said, standing quickly. She hurried toward the back offices, the card clutched in her hand. Marcus and David exchanged glances. This wasn't protocol. When they escorted someone out, it happened immediately, not after the receptionist ran off looking pale. Trevor shook his head, chuckling. This is what happens when society gets soft. We can't even maintain basic standards anymore. Next thing you know, they'll be letting anyone walk into the vault. The lawyer in the chair cleared his throat uncomfortably, but said nothing. The businesswoman checked her watch, eager to leave this scene behind. The old man turned slowly and walked to one of the leather chairs. He sat down carefully, his coat leaving a damp impression on the expensive material. He placed his weathered hands on his knees and waited. Just waited. Something about his posture unnerved Trevor. There was no desperation there. No embellishment. The old man sat like someone who'd been in rooms far more important than this one. Jennifer found Richard Sterling in his office reviewing quarterly reports. Richard was 56, senior vice president of private wealth management, and he'd seen everything in his 30 years of banking. Or so he thought. Richard, Jennifer said breathlessly, closing the door behind her. I need you at the desk. Now. He looked up, annoyed. Jennifer, if this is about another walk-in wanting to open, please. She placed the card on his desk. Just look. Richard picked up the card, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion to something Jennifer couldn't quite read. He held it closer to his desk lamp, examining the worn surface. Where did you get this? His voice was very quiet. A man, an older black gentleman. He's in the lobby. What's his name? He only gave me a first name. William. Richard stood abruptly, the card gripped tightly. Show me. They walked back through the offices, Richard's pace quickening. When they emerged into the lobby, his eyes scanned the space until they found the old man sitting calmly in the chair. Richard approached slowly, Jennifer trailing behind. Marcus and David straightened, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Trevor was still holding court near the coffee station, regaling two other clients with his commentary. I'm telling you, it's performance art. Has to be. Some kind of social experiment about. Excuse me, Richard said firmly, cutting him off. He knelt beside the old man's chair, lowering himself to eye level. Sir, I'm Richard Sterling. I'm a senior manager here. The old man looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were clear, sharp, alive with intelligence. Hello, Richard, he said. Sir, this card. Richard held it up carefully. When was the last time you used this account? It's been some time. How long? The old man considered the question. What year is it? Richard blinked. It's 2024. Then it's been 32 years. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Richard tried to maintain his composure. Sir, I'm going to need your full name. William. William Patterson. Richard's face went pale. He stood quickly, nearly stumbling. Jennifer, I need you to lock the doors. What? Trevor's smile finally vanished. You're joking. Lock them now, Richard repeated. No one enters or exits until I say otherwise. Jennifer rushed to the security panel. The automatic door sealed with a soft click. The magnetic locks engaged. Are you serious? Trevor demanded. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. You can't just. Mr. Blackwood, Richard said, his voice carrying an edge now. Please be quiet. Trevor's jaw dropped. Richard Sterling had managed his accounts for 5 years. Richard had never, not once, told him to be quiet. Marcus and David moved to strategic positions, their training kicking in. Something was wrong. Something big. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory, not his contacts. He turned away slightly, but his voice still carried. This is Sterling, branch 472. I need an executive verification immediately. Yes, I know what time it is. This is priority level, yes. That level. He paused, listening. The name is William Patterson. Account number. He read the worn digits from the card. Yes, I'll hold. The silence stretched. Every eye in the lobby was now on the old man. William, who sat with the same patient calm as before. Trevor felt something cold settling in his stomach. The amusement was gone, replaced by confusion and something that might have been the first hint of concern. The lawyer had set down his documents. The businesswoman had stopped pretending to check her phone. Richard listened to his phone, his face growing more ashen with each passing second. I understand. Yes. No. He's here in person. Yes, I can confirm. 20 minutes? Understood. He ended the call and looked at William. Sir, Richard said carefully, when was the last time you accessed this account? William met his gaze steadily. Before I disappeared. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everyone who heard them. Disappeared, Richard repeated. It wasn't safe to stay, William said simply. So I left. The money, the access, everything. I froze it all and walked away. Why? The question came from Jennifer, who'd returned from the security panel. William looked at her, and his expression softened. Because I learned something about this industry that I couldn't unsee. And when I try to make it right, they try to make me disappear permanently. So I disappeared on my own terms. Trevor found his voice again, but it had lost its edge. This is insane. This is... Richard, what the hell is going on? Richard didn't answer. He was staring at his phone, where a text had just arrived. Headquarters Yen route. Seal all records. Do not process further without authorization. William shifted in his chair, and everyone tensed. But he just reached into his pocket again, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a worn handkerchief. He wiped his face, drying the rain that had plastered his gray hair against his skull. I didn't come here to cause a scene, he said quietly. I came because I'm running out of time, and there are things that need to be said, things that need to be made right. What things? Marcus asked, his guard training warring with sudden curiosity. William looked around the lobby, at the marble, the glass, the wealth on display. This building, this system, I helped design parts of it. Not the architecture, the framework, the invisible structures that determine who gets access and who doesn't, who builds wealth and who loses it. Trevor laughed, but it sounded hollow now. You design banking systems? I did. William's voice remained calm, factual. Back when I had different clothes and people listened. Back when my ideas were worth something to people like you. Richard's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, account verified. Standing by for authorization to display balance. Prepare for executive arrival. Sir, Richard said slowly, my supervisor will be here shortly. Would you prefer to wait in a private conference room? No. William's answer was immediate. I've been invisible long enough. Whatever happens next happens here, where people can see. Trevor ran a hand through his perfect hair, his confidence cracking. Richard, seriously, I need to leave. I have obligations. No one leaves, Richard said flatly. You can't hold us hostage. I'm not holding anyone hostage, Mr. Blackwood. But that man's account requires executive authorization to access. And until that happens, this facility is under security protocol. Those are the rules. Your rules, actually, since you voted for them at the last advisory board meeting. Trevor's face flushed. He'd voted for those protocols as a joke, never thinking they'd apply to him. Jennifer returned to her desk, but she couldn't take her eyes off William. She remembered her training about legacy accounts, the special classifications for clients from the early days of the bank's history. She'd never actually seen one activated. The rumor was they didn't exist anymore, but clearly they did. A junior analyst named Marcus Chun, no relation to Security Marcus, emerged from the back offices with a tablet. He approached Richard hesitantly. Sir, I pulled what I could access without authorization, he said quietly. You need to see this. Richard took the tablet. His eyes widened as he scrolled. What? Trevor demanded. What is it? Richard didn't answer immediately. He was reading transaction histories that predated digital banking. Records that had been migrated from physical ledgers decades ago. Account activity that stopped abruptly in 1992. And an interest rate that was no longer legal. Hadn't been legal for 20 years, but remained locked into this account from a time when such rates were standard. Compounding, untouched, for 32 years. Mr. Patterson, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand what your account balance might be? William closed his eyes. I understand what it cost. That's not what I asked. I know. William opened his eyes again. But it's the only answer that matters. Trevor pushed forward, tried to see the tablet. How much? Just tell us how much. Richard pulled the tablet away. That's confidential information. Confidential? We're all locked in here. You've turned this into some kind of circus, and you won't even. Mr. Blackwood. William's voice cut through Trevor's tirade. Not loud. Not angry. Just firm. You really want to know? Yes. What? The question caught Trevor off guard. What do you mean, why? Because this is absurd. Because you're homeless, and you're claiming to be some kind of secret millionaire, and none of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense, William agreed. None of it should. That's the point. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again. The door suddenly unlocked with a click. An older woman entered, late 60s, with silver hair and a presence that commanded immediate attention. Her name was Margaret Chun, branch executive and one of 3 people in the region with override authority. She looked at William, then at Richard, then back at William. Mr. Patterson, she said. It wasn't a question. Ms. Chun, William replied. It's been a long time. You know him? Richard asked. Margaret's expression was unreadable. I know of him. I was still in junior management when he left. The account has been flagged in our system for 3 decades. Flag how? As inactive pending ethical reconciliation. Margaret approached William slowly, respectfully. Sir, I need to ask you something very important. Why now? After all these years, why come back now? William looked down at his trembling hands. Because I'm dying. And because I spent 32 years living with what I knew, watching the world from the outside, and I realized something. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just lets the wrong things continue. The lobby was completely silent now. Margaret nodded slowly. You want to unfreeze the account? No, William said. I want the truth first. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Patterson, once certain processes begin, they cannot be stopped. I know. Do you? Margaret glanced at Trevor, at the other clients, at the staff watching from doorways. Sir, what you started when you froze this account, the documentation you filed, the conditions you set, if those are activated, there will be consequences. Significant ones. For many people. Trevor's smug expression had completely evaporated. What is she talking about? William turned to look at him fully for the first time. Really looked at him. Studied him. What's your name? William asked. Trevor Blackwood. What do you do, Trevor? I'm a tech entrepreneur. Founder and CEO of Blackwood Solutions. William nodded slowly. And how did you start your company? I built it. From nothing. I worked 80-hour weeks. I took risks. How did you fund it? William interrupted gently. Trevor hesitated. Investors. Angel investors in the early days, then venture capital. Do you remember their names? Some of them. It was years ago. Do you remember anyone named Patterson? The question hung in the air like a blade. Trevor's face went blank. There was an anonymous donor. In the beginning. They called it the Patterson Grant, but I never met them. It was administered through a foundation. William closed his eyes again. When he opened them, they were wet. That was me, he said quietly. Before I disappeared, I set up funds to help young entrepreneurs who the traditional system wouldn't touch. People with ideas but no connections. No family money. No Ivy League networks. Trevor's face drained of color. You were one of 43 people I funded, William continued. I never asked for credit. Never asked for returns. I just wanted to see if the system could work the way it was supposed to, helping talent regardless of where it came from. I didn't know, Trevor whispered. I know you didn't. William's voice carried no anger, just profound sadness. That's what I wanted to see today. If the people who benefited from the system I tried to fix even remembered that someone helped them, if they would extend that same help to someone who looked like I look now. Trevor couldn't speak, couldn't move. Margaret pulled out her phone. Mr. Patterson, I need authorization from corporate headquarters to proceed. But I have to tell you, once this process starts, everything you documented will become part of official record. Everything you witnessed. Everything you reported before you disappeared. I understand. The people you exposed, some are still in positions of power. I know. They will fight this. William smiled for the first time, and it was heartbreaking. Let them. Margaret made the call. She walked away, her voice low and urgent. Richard stood frozen, the tablet still in his hands, looking at numbers that couldn't be real but were. Jennifer wiped her eyes, not even trying to hide her tears anymore. Marcus and David remained at their posts, but their body language had completely changed. They weren't guarding against William anymore. They were protecting him. Trevor sank into a chair, his perfect hair disheveled now, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like costume. He thought about his company, his success, the speeches he'd given about being self-made. All of it built on the kindness of a man he'd laughed at. Margaret returned, her face grave. It's authorized. Mr. Patterson, they're sending the full executive team. They'll be here in 15 minutes. Until then, I have clearance to show you your account status. Just the balance, William said. That's all I asked for. Margaret gestured to Richard, who moved to the reception desk. He connected the tablet to the main display, a large screen typically used for presentations to high-value clients. Everyone in the lobby could see it. Richard entered his executive password. Then Margaret entered hers. The system required both. The screen flickered. Loading. William stood slowly, his old bones protesting. He walked to the desk, each step deliberate. Trevor watched him, unable to look away. The screen continued loading and loading. The progress bar moved slowly, pulling data from archives that predated modern servers, translating between systems that shouldn't be able to communicate anymore. Margaret whispered, Mr. Patterson, before this displays, I need to know, what do you want to happen next? William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want everyone to see what silence costs. The screen finished loading. The number appeared. Richard made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Jennifer covered her mouth. Marcus, the security guard, actually took a step back. Margaret closed her eyes. Trevor stared at the screen, his brain refusing to process what he was seeing. The balance wasn't in millions. It was far, far beyond that. And beneath the number, a message appeared in red text. Account status. Frozen pending ethical reconciliation attached documentation. 847 files witness testimony. Verified awaiting final authorization for full disclosure. William Patterson looked at the screen, at the wealth he'd walked away from, at the price of his truth, and said one word. Now. The word now hung in the air like a verdict. Margaret Chin stood perfectly still, her hand hovering over her phone. She'd spent 40 years in banking, navigated 3 recessions, managed crises that would have destroyed lesser institutions. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Watching a man in a tattered coat command a room full of millionaires with a single syllable. Richard Sterling's fingers trembled over the keyboard. Mr. Patterson, if I authorize full disclosure, the system will automatically notify every entity referenced in those files. That's 847 separate documents. Legal teams will be activated. Investigations will open. This isn't something we can undo. William Patterson turned from the screen, his weathered face calm. I didn't spend 32 years homeless to undo anything, Richard. I spent them waiting for the right time. This is that time. You could have come back years ago, Margaret said quietly. Why wait until now? Because I needed to be sure. William gestured at the screen, at the impossible balance still glowing. Money creates noise. It drowns out truth. I needed to disappear completely, become invisible, so that when I came back, people would see what matters. Not wealth, not power, just truth. Trevor Blackwood remained collapsed in his chair, staring at nothing. His phone had been buzzing nonstop in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. The board meeting he'd been rushing to suddenly seemed like it belonged to a different life. Someone else's life. Jennifer approached William hesitantly. Sir, I'm so sorry. When you first came in, I should have. You did exactly what you were trained to do. William interrupted gently. You saw someone who looked homeless, and you directed them away. That's not your fault. That's the system working exactly as it was designed. Designed by who? Marcus, the security guard, asked. He'd moved closer now, no longer in a defensive stance, but genuinely curious. By people who understood that the best way to maintain power isn't through obvious barriers, William said. It's through invisible ones. Make people feel unwelcome before they even ask. Train staff to see certain appearances as problems to be removed. Create an environment where only certain people feel like they belong. Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face tightening. Corporate is here. They're coming up now. The elevator chimed. 3 people emerged. 2 men in their 50s wearing suits that cost more than most cars, and a younger woman with sharp eyes and a tablet clutched to her chest. The lead man, tall and severe-looking, scanned the lobby until his eyes found William. His face went pale. Dear God, he whispered. It really is you. William studied him for a moment. Hello, James. James Whitmore, Chief Operating Officer of Wellstone Financial, crossed the lobby slowly. The confidence that usually radiated from him had evaporated. William, we thought you were dead. You hoped I was dead, William corrected softly. There's a difference. James flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? William tilted his head. When I came to you in 1992 with evidence of predatory lending practices, systematic targeting of minority neighborhoods, manufactured defaults, falsified documentation, what did you do? The lobby had gone completely silent. Even Trevor was listening now, his earlier smugness replaced by dawning horror. James glanced at Margaret, at Richard, at the other clients watching. William, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. William's voice remained calm, but it carried weight now. Authority. I came to you with proof. Names, dates, transaction records. I showed you how we were destroying families while pretending to help them. And you told me it was complicated. You told me to let it go. The board made that decision, not me. You were on the board, James. You voted. James had no response to that. The woman with the tablet stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, I'm Sarah Kim, General Counsel. Before we proceed, I need to understand your intentions. Are you seeking financial restitution? No. Reinstatement of reputation? No. Then what? William looked at her directly. I want the truth on record. I want the families who were destroyed to know it wasn't their fault. I want the people who benefited to understand where their wealth really came from. And I want to make sure it never happens again. Sarah's expression shifted. This wasn't a lawsuit she could settle. This was something more dangerous. A man with nothing to lose and everything documented. The files attached to your account, she said carefully. You compiled them before you disappeared? I did. They're comprehensive? Yes. And you want them released? I want them transferred to the appropriate authorities. Financial regulators. Justice Department. Anyone who will actually read them and act. James made a noise like he'd been punched. William, do you understand what you're asking? Those files implicate dozens of people. Some are retired. Some are dead. You'll destroy legacies. They destroyed lives, William replied. Plural. Thousands of them. Families lost homes. Children lost opportunities. Entire communities were targeted and broken. Where was the concern for their legacies? The second executive, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. His name was Robert Hayes, Chief Risk Officer. Mr. Patterson, the statute of limitations on most of those activities has expired. Even if your documentation is accurate, criminal prosecution is unlikely. I know, William nodded, but truth doesn't have a statute of limitations. And the systems that enabled that behavior, they're still in place, still operating, still destroying people, just more quietly now. Trevor suddenly stood up, his legs unsteady. Wait, you said I was one of 43 people you funded. What happened to the others? William turned to him, and for the first time, something close to warmth crossed his face. 27 of them succeeded. 11 failed, but learned valuable lessons. 5 are still trying. You were the only one who became a millionaire. Why me? I don't know, William admitted. Sometimes success is talent. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's just luck. But I can tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't because you were smarter or worked harder than the others. You just happened to be in the right place when the market turned. Trevor sat back, down heavily. His entire self-image, carefully constructed over years of success, was crumbling. Every speech he'd given about being self-made, every interview where he'd attributed his success to grit and determination, all of it built on a foundation he hadn't known existed. Margaret stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, I need to inform you that if you authorize full disclosure, several things will happen automatically. Your account will be unfrozen. The balance will become accessible. But more importantly, every downstream entity that benefited from the original funds will be flagged for review. Downstream entity? Jennifer asked. Companies, trusts, foundations, Sarah explained. When Mr. Patterson disappeared, his accounts were frozen, but the money he'd already distributed continued to circulate. It was invested, loaned out, used as collateral. Over 32 years, that money touched hundreds of organizations. She looked at Trevor. Including yours, Mr. Blackwood. Trevor's face went white. What does that mean? It means your company's original funding came from an ethically compromised source, Robert said bluntly. Not because of anything you did, but because the money Mr. Patterson used came from this bank, a bank that was engaging in predatory practices while simultaneously funding community development initiatives. The irony is almost poetic. That's insane, Trevor said. You can't hold me responsible for where money came from before I even touched it. No one's holding you responsible, Williams said quietly. I'm just asking you to acknowledge it, to understand that your success didn't happen in a vacuum. Other people lost everything so that the system could generate the kind of returns that funded your dreams. Trevor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. Richard had been working on his tablet, his face growing increasingly pale. Mr. Patterson, I'm looking at the transaction chain. The account balance shown on the screen, that's not just compound interest. There are connections I don't understand. Show me, Williams said. Richard turned the tablet around. A complex web of financial relationships filled the screen. Accounts linked to accounts, investments tied to investments, a sprawling network that looked more like a neural map than a banking ledger. Your original account held deposits from your salary as a systems architect, Richard explained, but also held something else: performance bonuses, stock options, compensation tied to the bank's growth. I never cashed them out, Williams said. No, you didn't, but they kept accruing. And because your account was frozen under such unusual circumstances, the legal team at the time classified it as an institutional liability. To offset that liability, they tied your compensation to specific revenue streams. What kind of revenue streams? Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Richard's voice dropped. The predatory lending division. For 32 years, a percentage of profits from the very practices Mr. Patterson exposed has been flowing into his frozen account. The room erupted. That's impossible, James stammered. We would have caught that. Auditors would have. It was automated, Sarah interrupted, her face grim as she scrolled through her own tablet. Set up in the 1980s when banking regulations were different. The system just kept running because no one had authorization to touch the account, and the original programmers never imagined it would stay frozen for decades. William closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. You mean to tell me that everything I tried to stop, all the harm, all the destruction, was funding my own account? Yes, Richard said softly. How much? William's voice cracked. How much of that balance comes from the practices I tried to expose? Sarah worked her tablet quickly, running calculations. Approximately 47%. William swayed slightly. Marcus moved to steady him, but William waved him off. I need to sit. Jennifer rushed to bring him water. He accepted it with trembling hands, taking small sips while everyone waited. Trevor found his voice again. So let me get this straight. The bank was stealing from people, and those profits were paying you. Then you try to blow the whistle, and they froze your account. But they never stopped the automatic payments. So for 30 years, you've been getting richer off the exact thing you tried to stop? He didn't get richer, Margaret corrected. The account was frozen. He couldn't access any of it, but it was still there, still growing, still connected to suffering. Yes, William whispered. Still connected. He looked up at James. Did you know? When you froze the account, did you know the compensation structure would keep running? James hesitated too long. You knew, William said. It wasn't a question. We thought. James struggled. We thought if we kept the account intact, kept everything technically legal, you might come back. Might let it go. The alternative was admitting what we'd done, and that would have destroyed the bank. So you made me complicit, William said. Even in my absence. Even in my resistance. You made me part of the machine. We made you rich, James said, then immediately regretted it. William stood up slowly. Despite his frail appearance, despite his tattered coat and worn shoes, he suddenly seemed to fill the room. You made me a prisoner. You thought money would keep me quiet. You thought time would erase evidence. You thought I'd die forgotten, and this would all disappear. William, but I didn't die, and I didn't forget. And I spent 32 years living with the weight of what I knew, watching from the streets as people like him. He pointed at Trevor, built empires on foundations they didn't understand, while people like me were ignored, dismissed, laughed at. Trevor flinched. So yes, William continued. I want full disclosure. I want every file released. I want investigators to see the transaction chains, the automated systems, the convenient oversights that kept profits flowing while families drowned. And I want that blood money, every penny that came from predatory practices, redistributed to the people it was stolen from. That's not possible, Roberts said. Most of those accounts are decades old. People have moved. Some have died. Tracking down beneficiaries would take years. Then take years, Williams said simply. I'm not in a hurry anymore. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, if we proceed with this, the bank will fight you. We'll tie this up in litigation for decades. You'll never see resolution. I don't need to see it, William replied. I just need to start it. Margaret had been quietly crying. Now she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Mr. Patterson, I want you to know something. I was a junior analyst when you disappeared. I read your reports. I believed you, and I was too scared to say anything. William looked at her with compassion. You were protecting yourself. That's human. It was cowardice. It was survival. There's a difference. He paused. But now is your chance to choose differently. Margaret nodded slowly. She turned to Richard. Authorize full disclosure. Transfer the files to federal regulators. Flag every connected account for review. And start the restitution process. Margaret, you can't, James started. I can't, Margaret said firmly. I have executive authority over this branch, and Mr. Patterson is my client. His instructions are clear. We proceed. James looked at Sarah, at Robert, at the enormous liability they were about to unleash. This will destroy the bank. No, William said. This will force the bank to become what it always should have been. What I thought it was when I worked here. An institution that serves people, not one that feeds on them. Richard's fingers moved over his keyboard. Authorization codes were entered. Passwords confirmed. System after system unlocked. On the main screen, the 847 files began transferring. Each one represented hours of investigation, documentation, evidence collected in secret before William disappeared. Loan applications with falsified risk assessments. Internal memos discussing targeting strategies. Profit reports celebrating successful foreclosures. All of it entering the official record. Trevor watched the transfer progress bar, feeling sick. He pulled out his phone finally and saw dozens of messages from his board, from investors, from lawyers. News was already spreading. His stock price was dropping in real time. He looked at William. What should I do? William considered the question. What do you think you should do? I don't know. None of this was my fault. I didn't know where the money came from. But now you do. Trevor's hand shook. If I acknowledge this publicly, my company could collapse. Investors will flee. I have employees who depend on me. Families. Yes, William said. You do. And those families will face uncertainty. That's hard. That's unfair. But it's not nearly as hard or unfair as what happened to the families who lost everything to make your success possible. So I'm supposed to sacrifice everything? I'm not telling you what to do, Trevor. I'm just asking you to understand the truth. What you do with that truth is your choice. The file transfer completed. Sarah's tablet immediately began buzzing with notifications. Automated alerts going to federal agencies, state regulators, financial oversight committees. It's done, she said quietly. William nodded. Good. James slumped against the wall. You just ended your own life too, you know. That account balance, 47% of it is tainted. You can't access those funds without becoming complicit in the same practices you're exposing. I know, William said. That's why I'm donating it. All of it. Every penny that came from predatory practices goes to restitution funds. The rest gets distributed to organizations that help people the system was designed to crush. What about you? Jennifer asked. What will you live on? William smiled sadly. I've been homeless for 32 years. I think I can manage a bit longer. That's not fair, she said. You earned that money. You worked for it. No, William correctamente. I was paid for my work. But earning implies value exchange, and there was no value in what happened here. There was only extraction, taking from a vulnerable to give to the powerful. I won't benefit from that, even by accident. Margaret was working her phone, coordinating with headquarters. Mr. Patterson, they're asking if you'll speak to investigators. Give testimony. Yes. It could take months. Years. I have cancer, William said simply. Stage 4. Maybe 6 months left, maybe less. But I'll give testimony as long as I'm able. Every detail, every name, every mechanism of harm I witnessed or helped create. The room went silent. Trevor felt something crack inside his chest. This man, this dignified, brilliant man he'd mocked and dismissed, was dying. And instead of spending his final months in comfort, he was choosing to spend them tearing down a system that had betrayed him. I am sorry, Trevor whispered. For earlier, for laughing, for everything. William looked at him for a long moment. I know you are. The question is, what will you do with that sorrow? Will you let it change you, or will you just feel bad for a while and then go back to business as usual? Trevor had no answer. Richard was still staring at the screen where the balance had been displayed. Mr. Patterson, even after the restitution, even after donating the compromised funds, there's still a substantial amount remaining. The clean money. What should we do with that? How much? William asked. Richard did quick calculations. Approximately $53 million. From legitimate compensation, properly invested, with no connection to predatory practices. William looked around the room, at the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the display of wealth that served no purpose except to intimidate people like him. Give it away, he said. Create a fund, an independent one, outside this bank's control. Use it to audit financial institutions, to investigate complaints, to provide legal support for people fighting predatory practices. Let it be a permanent thorn in the side of anyone who tries to do what was done to me and thousands of others. That's... Margaret's voice caught. That's an extraordinary gift. It's not a gift, William said. It's restitution for my own complicity. I helped design these systems. I made them more efficient, more effective. I didn't know they'd be weaponized, but ignorance isn't innocence. So this is my attempt at balance, at settling accounts that can't be settled with money alone. Sarah was typing rapidly. Mr. Patterson, we'll need extensive documentation for this. Estate planning, legal structures, oversight boards. This will take time to implement properly. Then we better start, William said. James pushed off from the wall. His face had aged 10 years in the past hour. William, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for what happened to you, but for what I became. I convinced myself that business was business, that regulations were just obstacles, that success justified any means. I was wrong. Yes, William agreed. You were. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make this right? William thought about it. Resign. Let someone else lead who actually remembers why banks were created in the first place, to serve communities, not to extract from them. And then, if you really want to help, spend whatever time you have left teaching people about what you did wrong. Be a cautionary tale. James nodded slowly. I can do that. The elevator chimed again. This time, a dozen people emerged, FBI agents, federal regulators, attorneys from the Justice Department. They'd been notified automatically when the files were released. One agent, a woman in her 40s, approached William. Mr. Patterson, I'm Special Agent Rachel Morrison. We're here to take your statement and secure the evidence. Of course, William said. She looked around the lobby, at the assembled executives, at Trevor still slumped in his chair, at the security guards who'd shifted from intimidating the old man to protecting him. Sir, before we begin, I have to ask why now? Why wait 3 decades to come forward? William smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Because I needed to know if I was right. When I first exposed this corruption, they told me I was naive. That the world didn't work the way I wanted it to. That ideals were nice, but reality was harsh. So I disappeared into that harsh reality. Lived it. Experienced what it meant to be powerless, invisible, dismissed. He gestured around the bank. And you know what I learned? I was right. The system is corrupt. It does target the vulnerable. It does reward cruelty and punish kindness. But I also learned something else. That truth is patient. It can wait decades if necessary. It can survive in frozen accounts and sealed files. And when it finally emerges, it carries the weight of all those years of silence. Agent Morrison nodded. We'll need you to come with us, sir. This will take a while. I understand. As they began gathering the documentation, Trevor stood up. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to cross the lobby. He stood in front of William. This man he'd humiliated and struggled to find words. I don't know what to say, Trevor admitted. Then listen, William replied. For once in your life, just listen. To people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't have what you have. Listen to their stories. Believe them. And when you have the power to help, actually help. Don't perform help for credit or tax benefits. Actually sacrifice something meaningful. Will that make us even? No, William said honestly. But it might make you human. Trevor nodded, tears streaming down his face. He pulled out his phone and began typing. A message to his board. A statement to investors. The beginning of a very different conversation than he'd planned to have. Margaret approached William with a folder. Mr. Patterson, these are your account access codes. The clean funds. $53 million that belongs to you, legitimately. Even if you plan to donate it, you should have control over the process. William took the folder, but didn't open it. Margaret, I want you to do something for me. Anything. I want you to personally oversee the restitution process. The predatory lending victims, the families who lost homes, find them. Not through automated systems or corporate procedures. Actually find them. Visit them. Tell them what happened. Give them their money back with interest and an apology that means something. Margaret's composure finally broke completely. She sobbed openly, nodding. I will. I promise. Thank you. William touched her shoulder gently. And Margaret, stop being afraid. You were afraid to speak up 32 years ago. Don't be afraid anymore. Use your position to make real changes. You have the power now. Use it. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak. Agent Morrison returned with her team. Mr. Patterson, we're ready. William looked around the lobby one last time. At the marble floors where his wet shoes had left prints. At the glass walls that had reflected his invisible existence back at him. At the people, powerful, wealthy, comfortable people, who would never forget this morning. I'm ready too, he said. As they escorted him out, he paused at the door and turned back. His eyes found Trevor's. The grant that funded your company, William said. It was called the Patterson Grant, but there was another name for it. The one I used internally. What was it? Trevor asked. Seconde chance. William smiled. Everyone deserves them. The question is what you do with yours. Then he was gone, surrounded by federal agents, heading toward whatever remained of his life. The lobby stood in stunned silence. Richard slowly shut down the main display. The screen went dark, but the image of that balance, that impossible, terrible, beautiful balance, remained burned into everyone's memory. Trevor looked at his phone. His stock had dropped 40%. His investors were panicking. His lawyers were demanding emergency meetings. And for the first time in his adult life, none of it mattered. He thought about second chances, about what it meant to be self-made, about the invisible foundations that held up empires. Jennifer approached him carefully. Mr. Blackwood, your relationship manager, is asking if you need anything. Trevor looked at her, really looked at her, seeing her as a person for the first time instead of just service staff. No, he said quietly, but I think a lot of other people do. Outside, rain continued to fall on the city, washing streets, filling gutters, flowing toward the ocean where all water eventually finds its level. Inside the bank, the marble floors gleamed, but they would never look quite as clean again. 3 hours after William Patterson walked out of the Wellstone Private Banking Center, surrounded by federal agents, the financial world began to fracture. It started quietly. A Bloomberg terminal alert, a Reuters notification. Then CNBC picked it up, and within minutes, every major news outlet was scrambling to understand what had just happened. The headline that broke first was simple. Frozen account unleashes decades of banking fraud evidence. But the story beneath, it was anything but simple. Trevor Blackwood sat in his corner office 60 floors above the city, watching his company dissolve in real time. The stock ticker in the corner of his screen showed Blackwood Solutions dropping. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. His assistant had given up trying screen calls. His CFO burst through the door without knocking. Trevor, we need to talk. Now. I know, Marcus. Do you? Because I've got 7 board members demanding your resignation, 3 major investors pulling out, and the SEC has already opened an inquiry. What the hell happened at that bank? Trevor turned from the window. His eyes were red, his perfect hair disheveled. I met the man who made all this possible, and then I watched him give it all away because it was built on suffering. Marcus stared at him. What are you talking about? The Patterson Grant, our seed funding, the anonymous donor who believed in me when nobody else would. Trevor's voice cracked. He was homeless. I laughed at him. I told security to throw him out, and he just sat there and waited for me to see the truth. Homeless? Trevor, you're not making sense. That's because none of this makes sense. Trevor stood abruptly, papers scattering from his desk. We built this company on money that came from destroying families. We tell ourselves we're innovators, disruptors, job creators. But we're just beneficiaries of a system that feeds on people who have nothing. Marcus backed toward the door. You need to sleep or talk to someone. But you can't say things like that. Not now. Not with everything falling apart. Everything should fall apart, Trevor said quietly. That's what he was trying to show me. Across the city, in a small federal building, William Patterson sat in an interview room answering questions. Agent Morrison sat across from him, a recorder between them, while two other agents took notes. Mr. Patterson, walk me through how you first discovered the predatory lending practices. William's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. It started with a pattern. In 1989, I was designing risk assessment algorithms for the mortgage division. I noticed that certain zip codes were being flagged for higher interest rates, even when applicants had identical credit profiles to applicants from other areas. What made these zip codes different? They were predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. The algorithm wasn't supposed to consider race, but it was using proxies. Neighborhood composition, school district ratings, property age, all of it mapped almost perfectly onto racial demographics. Agent Morrison leaned forward. And you reported this? Not at first. I thought it was a bug, something in the code that could be fixed. So I ran the numbers again, cleaned the data, rebuilt the model from scratch. William's hands trembled slightly, but the results were the same. The system was working exactly as designed. It was supposed to extract maximum profit from vulnerable communities while maintaining plausible deniability about racial targeting. Who designed it that way? William closed his eyes. I did. Not intentionally, but I wrote the code. I built the framework. I was so focused on efficiency and accuracy that I never questioned what I was being asked to optimize for. When they said maximize returns, I thought they meant through better risk assessment. I didn't realize they meant through systematic exploitation. What happened when you realized the truth? I went to my supervisor, showed him the data, explained how the algorithm was functioning. He told me I was overthinking it, that business was business, that these were just market corrections. William opened his eyes, and they were wet. Then I went to his supervisor, got the same response. Then to the vice president, the senior vice president. Finally to James Whitmore, who was on the executive board. What did Mr. Whitmore say? He thanked me for my diligence, told me these were complex issues that required careful consideration, asked me to document everything I'd found and give it to him confidentially, said he'd handle it internally. William's voice hardened. I was naive enough to believe him. What happened to your documentation? It disappeared. The files I compiled, the backup drives, even the email chains. All of it vanished from the system. And when I tried to recreate it, I found my access to the relevant databases had been revoked. For security purposes, they said. Agent Morrison glanced at her colleagues. But you'd already made copies. Yes, I'm not that naive. I had paper copies, external drives, everything stored off-site. I kept waiting for the board to act on my report. Kept thinking they needed time to investigate, to build a case, to do the right thing. He laughed bitterly. It took me 6 months to realize they weren't going to do anything. They were just waiting for me to give up or go away. So you disappeared. Not immediately. First, I tried going external. I contacted the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, even tried reaching out to journalists. But everywhere I turned, I hit walls. The bank had relationships, connections, lawyers who could make problems go away quietly. I was just one systems architect making serious accusations against a major financial institution. When did you decide to leave? William was quiet for a long moment. When my wife got sick, we had good insurance through the bank, and she needed treatment. Expensive treatment. I realized that if I kept pushing, I'd lose my job and she'd lose her coverage. So I had a choice: be silent and save my wife, or speak up and watch her die. What did you choose? I chose her. I shut up, kept my head down, tried to pretend I didn't know what I knew. She got her treatment. She survived. His voice broke. For 3 years. Then the cancer came back, and this time the insurance found reasons to deny coverage. Experimental treatments, they said, not medically necessary. Pre-existing conditions in her family history. Agent Morrison's expression softened. Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry. She died in 1991, and I realized that staying silent hadn't protected her at all. The same system I was trying to navigate destroyed her anyway, just more slowly. William wiped his eyes. So I froze my accounts, compiled everything I had, set up conditions that would preserve the evidence even if I vanished. Then I walked away. Why not just release everything then? Because I was angry, devastated, not thinking clearly. I wanted to hurt them the way they'd hurt me and my wife. But I also knew that acting from rage wouldn't achieve anything meaningful. So I chose to disappear, to live the life of the people the system was designed to crush, to understand what it really meant to be invisible. For 32 years. Yes. Agent Morrison sat back. Mr. Patterson, you understand that what you're describing, the evidence you've preserved, the systematic nature of these practices, this could result in criminal charges, civil penalties in the billions. Multiple institutions could be implicated. I know. People's careers will be destroyed. Retirement's ruined. Families affected. I know that too, William said softly. But those things were already happening, just to different families. The families who lost their homes, their savings, their futures. The difference is that those families didn't have a choice about their suffering. The people who profited did. Back at Wellstone Bank, Margaret Chun had called an emergency meeting of senior staff. 20 people packed into the conference room, their faces ranging from confused to terrified. What we're dealing with, Margaret began, her voice steady despite everything, is not a public relations problem. It's a moral reckoning. Margaret, we need to focus on damage control. One of the regional managers interrupted. Our stock is down 30%. Clients are calling to move accounts. We're hemorrhaging money. Good, Margaret said, and the room went silent. We should hemorrhage money. We should lose clients. What we did, what this institution did, was unconscionable. And the fact that it took a dying man to force us to face it is shameful. Richard Sterling spoke up from the back of the room. The restitution process William requested. I've been running preliminary numbers. If we identify and compensate everyone affected by the predatory lending practices from 1985 to 1992 alone, we're looking at potentially $800 million. Someone gasped. That's impossible. We can't. We can, Margaret interrupted. And we will. William Patterson's contaminated funds, the 47% of his balance that came from those practices, that's approximately $63 million. It's a start, and will contribute matching funds from institutional reserves. The board will never approve that. Margaret smiled grimly. James Whitmore resigned an hour ago. Effective immediately. The board is in chaos, which means right now, I'm the highest-ranking executive in this region with the authority to act. And I'm acting. She pulled up a presentation on the screen. This is the restitution framework William and I discussed before he left. It's comprehensive, it's expensive, and it's the right thing to do. We'll start by identifying every mortgage originated during the relevant period in the targeted zip codes. Then we'll analyze each one for signs of discriminatory pricing or terms. That could take years, someone protested. Then it takes years, Margaret replied. We're not taking shortcuts anymore. We're doing this right. A junior analyst raised her hand hesitantly. Ms. Chun, what about the people who've already been compensated through previous settlements? The class action suits from the early 2000s. They get compensated again. Previous settlements were calculated based on incomplete information and designed to minimize payouts. We're going to calculate what these families actually lost, not just the direct financial impact, but the opportunity cost, the generational wealth that was stolen, the compounding effect of starting from a deficit. The room erupted in arguments. People talking over each other, pointing out the impossibility, the legal ramifications, the competitive disadvantage. Margaret let them talk themselves out. When the noise finally subsided, she said quietly, William Patterson spent 32 years homeless because we valued profit over people. He's dying now, and he's spending his final months testifying about our crimes instead of resting. The least we can do, the absolute minimum, is try to fix what we broke. Richard stood up. I'm with you, Margaret. Tell me what you need. One by one, others around the table nodded. Not everyone, but enough. At his apartment, Trevor Blackwood sat alone in the dark. His phone lay on the coffee table, screen down, still buzzing periodically. He'd stopped answering hours ago. On his laptop, he'd pulled up files he hadn't looked at in years. His original business plan, the grant application to the Patterson Foundation, the anonymous acceptance letter that had changed his life. He read the letter again, really read it this time. Dear Mr. Blackwood, your application demonstrates not just business acumen, but genuine concern for creating value beyond profit. You come from circumstances that most investors don't understand or value. That's not a weakness. It's a unique perspective that this industry desperately needs. We believe in second chances. We believe in you. Seconde chance. Trevor had built his entire identity on being self-made, on pulling himself up, on succeeding where others had failed. But he'd never actually pulled himself up. He'd been lifted by William Patterson, by a man who understood what it meant to start from nothing because the system had forced him to start over from nothing. His doorbell rang. Trevor ignored it. It rang again. Then his phone started buzzing, a different pattern. His assistant. He answered. What? Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. I'm not seeing anyone. She says her name is Patricia Holloway. She says William Patterson sent her. Trevor's breath caught. Sent her up. 2 minutes later, a black woman in her 60s stood in his doorway. She wore nurse's scrubs and carried an old shoulder bag. Her face was kind but firm. Mr. Blackwood, I'm Patricia. I've been helping care for William since he got sick. Come in, please. Trevor gestured to the living room, suddenly aware of how ostentatious everything looked through her eyes. The designer furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their million-dollar view. Patricia sat down carefully. William asked me to come talk to you. He said you were struggling with what to do next. I don't know if struggling is the right word. I don't know if there's anything I can do. He thought there might be. He asked me to tell you a story. Patricia opened her bag and pulled out an envelope. In 1993, I lost my house. I had a mortgage with Wellstone Bank. Fixed rate, or so I thought. But they kept finding fees to add, payments that didn't align with my contract, penalties for things I'd never agreed to. Trevor felt sick. I am sorry. It gets worse. When I fell behind, because of their additions, not my spending, they foreclosed. Took my house. Sold it at auction for less than I'd paid. Then came after me for the difference. I filed for bankruptcy. Lost everything I'd built in 15 years of nursing. Patricia, I don't know what to... I'm not finished. Her voice was gentle but unyielding. William Patterson tried to stop it. I didn't know him then, didn't know he existed. But his report from 1989 specifically cited my mortgage as an example of predatory practices. He fought for me before I even knew I needed fighting for. Trevor's eyes burned. What happened after you lost the house? I moved in with my sister. Rebuilt slowly. Took me 20 years to get back to stable. 20 years of my life stolen by a system that treated me like a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be served. She held up the envelope. William asked me to give you this. Trevor took it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. William's handwriting, shaky but legible. Trevor, Patricia is one of 47 people whose names I specifically documented in my original report. She lost her home. Others lost their businesses, their savings, their futures. You asked what you should do with your second chance. Here's my suggestion. Give them theirs. Not charity, not guilt money, real restitution. Use your platform, your resources, your privilege to amplify their voices and restore what was taken. That's what wealth is for. Not accumulation. Restoration. Trevor looked up at Patricia. What do you want from me? What do I want? Nothing. I'm here because William asked me to be. But if you're asking what would make a difference... She leaned forward. Help us find the others. The 46 people besides me who William documented. Many of them are old now. Some are probably dead. But their families remain. Their stolen futures remain stolen. Use your money, your connections, your company's resources to track them down and make it right. I can do that, Trevor said immediately. I will do that. William thought you would. He said you were a good person who'd gotten lost in success. That most people do. Trevor felt tears streaming down his face. I laughed at him. When he walked into that bank, I made jokes. I encouraged security to throw him out. I was cruel. Patricia nodded slowly. Yes, you were. William told me. But he also said you cried later. That you listened when you could have kept being defensive. That you showed the capacity to change. She stood up. That's all any of us can do, Mr. Blackwood. Change when we learn better. After she left, Trevor sat with the letter for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his board. Not a defensive explanation. Not a PR statement. The truth. He wrote about the Patterson grant. About William's sacrifice. About the system that had elevated him while crushing others. About his intention to dedicate company resources to restitution efforts. He wrote knowing it might cost him everything. His position, his wealth, his reputation. He wrote it anyway. At the federal building, Agent Morrison had called for a break. William sat in a small room with a cup of water, his hands still trembling from exhaustion. A young agent knocked and entered. Mr. Patterson? There's someone here asking to see you. A woman named Rachel Harrison. She says she's a journalist who's been trying to tell this story for 15 years. William looked up. Rachel Harrison from the Chronicle? Yes, sir. Send her in. Rachel Harrison was 42, with tired eyes that had seen too many stories die from lack of evidence or institutional pressure. She carried a worn notebook and an expression of barely contained emotion. Mr. Patterson, she said, sitting across from him. I've been trying to reach you for decades. Every lead went cold. I thought you were dead. I wanted people to think that. It was safer. I believe you. I've been investigating Wellstone and similar institutions since I was a junior reporter. I knew something was wrong, but I could never prove it. Sources would disappear. Documents would vanish. Lawyers would threaten. And eventually, my editors would kill the story. William nodded. They're good at making things disappear. People, evidence, truth. But not anymore. Rachel's voice shook slightly. The files you released today. Mr. Patterson, this is everything I've been searching for. Names, dates, transaction records, internal communications. This is Pulitzer-level documentation. It's not about prizes, Ms. Harrison. I know, but it's about truth reaching people. And I can make sure it does. I can write this story in a way that people understand. Not just the financial crimes, but the human cost. The families destroyed. The communities targeted. The intentional, systematic cruelty. William studied her. Why does this matter so much to you? Rachel was quiet for a moment. Because my mother lost her house to a predatory mortgage in 1990. From Wellstone Bank. She was a teacher, single parent, did everything right. And they destroyed her anyway. She died 5 years later, still in debt, still fighting. She wiped her eyes. I became a journalist to tell stories like hers. To make sure people knew these things happened. But until today, I never had proof strong enough to survive legal challenges. I'm sorry about your mother. Was she in your documentation? William closed his eyes, searching his memory. What was her name? Harrison. Sarah Harrison. Elementary school teacher? Northeast District. Rachel gasped. Yes. She was number 17 in my original report. Her mortgage had been restructured 3 times without her knowledge, each time adding fees and extending terms. I flagged it as particularly egregious. William opened his eyes. I tried to help her. I really did. Rachel couldn't speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was barely a whisper. She never knew. She died thinking it was her fault, that she'd failed somehow. It wasn't her fault. None of them were at fault. That's what I need people to understand. Rachel composed herself, opening her notebook. Then let me help you tell that story. The right way. The complete way. Will you give me an interview? Yes. But not just me. Talk to Patricia Holloway. Talk to the other survivors. Make them the center of the story, not me. I was just someone who documented what was already happening. You were more than that. You sacrificed everything to preserve the truth. William shook his head. I sacrificed everything because I couldn't live with being complicit. That's not heroic. It's just human. What would be heroic is if the people who profited from this system actually changed it, instead of waiting for dying men to force their hand. Rachel smiled sadly. I'll make sure that's in the article too. As evening fell over the city, the financial news networks were in full crisis mode. Analysts debated the implications. Legal experts speculated about prosecution timelines. Economists calculated potential market impacts. But in a small apartment across town, Margaret Shun sat at her kitchen table with a list of names. 47 people whose lives had been destroyed by the institution she'd worked for her entire career. She picked up her phone and dialed the first number. It rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. Hello. Hello. Is this Patricia Holloway? Yes. Who's this? Margaret took a deep breath. Ms. Holloway, my name is Margaret Shun. I'm a senior executive at Wellstone Bank. I'm calling because a very brave man named William Patterson made me promise to find you, to tell you the truth about what happened to your home in 1993, and to try to make it right. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Patricia said, "Tell me everything." And Margaret did. She talked for 2 hours. She explained the predatory practices, the systematic targeting, William's attempts to stop it. She shared the documentation, the evidence, the full truth that had been hidden for 3 decades. Patricia listened. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she got angry. But mostly, she just listened to someone from the institution that had destroyed her life finally telling the truth. When Margaret finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What happens now? Now we calculate what you're owed. Not just what was taken, but what you would have built if you'd been allowed to keep your home. If you'd been able to build equity, borrow against it, pass it to your children. We calculate the full cost of what was stolen. And then we pay you with interest, with an apology that actually means something, with a commitment that this will never happen again." Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. "Why should I believe you? Because William Patterson believed I would keep this promise. And he's earned the right to be believed." After hanging up, Margaret looked at the remaining 46 names on her list. 46 more calls to make. 46 more truths to tell. 46 more attempts at restoration that would never fully restore what was lost, but might begin to acknowledge it. She picked up the phone and dialed the second number. Across the city, in 46 other homes, phones began to ring. And one by one, people who'd spent decades thinking their suffering was their fault began to learn the truth. The system hadn't failed them. It had targeted them. And finally, someone was willing to admit it. 5 weeks after William Patterson walked into Wellstone Bank, the world looked different. Not completely different. Not transformed overnight. But different in the ways that matter. The small shifts that eventually become earthquakes. Trevor Blackwood stood in the conference room of his company headquarters, facing a room full of hostile board members. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He probably hadn't. "Let me be clear about what you're proposing," said Victoria Chun, his largest investor. "You want to redirect 40% of our operating budget toward a restitution fund for people who lost their homes 30 years ago. People who have no connection to this company." "They have every connection," Trevor replied quietly. "Our seed funding came from money that was generated by destroying their lives. We owe them. We don't owe them anything," another board member snapped. "You received a legitimate grant. What the bank did before that money reached you isn't your responsibility." Trevor pulled up a presentation on the screen. 47 faces appeared. Men and women, young and old, black and brown and white. These are the people William Patterson documented. The ones whose mortgages were specifically manipulated. Patricia Holloway lost her house. Jerome Williams lost his business when his commercial loan was called in early. Maria Foster lost her savings when fees mysteriously accumulated faster than her payments. He clicked to the next slide. And this is what happened to them afterward. Patricia spent 20 years rebuilding. Jerome never recovered. He died in debt. Maria is 78 now, working part-time at a grocery store because her retirement was stolen. Victoria's expression didn't soften. "That's tragic, but it's not our problem to solve." "Then whose problem is it?" Trevor demanded. "The banks? They're doing their part." Margaret Shun has personally contacted every victim, offered full restitution plus opportunity cost calculations. Some of them are getting 7-figure settlements. Good for them. It's not enough. Trevor's voice cracked. Money can't give Jerome Williams back the 30 years he spent in poverty. It can't restore Maria's dignity or Patricia's lost opportunities. But acknowledging where our success came from, that matters. showing that we understand we didn't build this alone. That matters. Victoria stood up. Trevor, I've known you for 8 years. You were ambitious, focused, driven. Now you're talking like a social worker. What happened to you? Trevor thought about that morning in the bank, about William's calm dignity, about his own cruelty, about the moment he'd realized his entire life was built on suffering he'd never acknowledged. I met someone who showed me what I'd become, he said simply, and I didn't like what I saw. So you're willing to destroy this company over guilt? I'm willing to transform this company into something worth being proud of. There's a difference. The room erupted in arguments. Some board members supported Trevor. Most didn't. The vote, when it came, was close. But Trevor lost. Effective immediately, Victoria announced, the board is removing you as CEO. You'll retain your shares and a seat on the board, but operational control passes to interim leadership. We'll begin a search for your replacement. Trevor nodded slowly. He'd expected this. Prepared for it, even. I understand. But before I go, I want you to know something. William Patterson is dying. He has maybe a month left, and he's spending that time testifying 6 hours a day about the crimes he witnessed, about the system that destroyed families like these. He gestured at the screen of faces. He doesn't have to do that. He could be with his friends, making peace, resting. But he's choosing to spend his final days fighting for people he never met, people who will never know his name, because he believes truth matters more than comfort. Trevor picked up his briefcase. I'm not as brave as he is. I'm not as principled, but I'm going to try. With or without this company, with or without your approval, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the person who deserved that grant, the person William Patterson believed I could become. He walked out of the boardroom for the last time. In the hallway, his assistant waited with a box of his personal belongings. She was crying. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood. Don't be, Angela. This is the first honest thing I've done in years. He took the box and headed for the elevator. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Shun. William asked to see you. Today, if possible. It's important. Trevor changed direction. The office could wait. This couldn't. At the hospice center across town, William Patterson sat in a chair by the window, looking thinner than he had 5 weeks ago. The cancer was winning, despite everything. Patricia Holloway sat beside him, holding his hand. When Trevor entered, Patricia stood. I'll give you some privacy. Stay, William said softly. You should hear this too. Trevor sat down across from them. I got fired today. William's eyes crinkled with something that might have been a smile. I heard. Margaret texted me. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. Meant like you don't change comfortable systems from the inside. They have to burn them down first. So what now? William reached into the bag beside his chair and pulled out a folder. His hand shook as he handed it to Trevor. This is the framework for the fund I'm establishing. The Permanent Watchdog Organization. It needs a director, someone who understands both sides, the world of privilege and the cost of the system that creates it. Trevor opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, organizational structures, funding mechanisms. You want me to run this? I want you to build it. Make it real. Make it matter. Why me? I don't have experience in nonprofit work. I don't have credentials in social justice or... You have something more important, Patricia interrupted. You have shame. Real shame that's pushing you toward action. That's rarer than credentials. Trevor looked at the documents. The fund would be massive. $53 million to start, plus ongoing contributions from restitution settlements. Its mission was clear. Investigate financial institutions, support victims of predatory practices, fund systemic reforms. This could actually change things, Trevor said quietly. It could, William agreed, if you're willing to do the work. Real work, not performative charity. It means learning from people like Patricia, listening to communities that have been harmed, using your privilege as a tool for others rather than a shield for yourself. I don't know if I can do that. Neither do I, William said honestly. But I'm betting on you anyway. Second chances, remember? Trevor felt tears threatening again. I don't deserve this. No, William agreed. But deserving isn't the point. Doing is the point. Will you do it? Trevor looked at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. He looked back at William, this man who'd given him everything and asked for nothing except truth. Yes, Trevor said. I'll do it. William sagged with relief. Good, because I need to know it's in capable hands before He stopped coughing. Patricia immediately handed him water. That's enough for today, William. You need to rest. I'll rest when I'm dead, William said, but there was no humor in it. Just fact. Trevor stood up. I'll come back tomorrow. We can discuss implementation details, strategies. No. William's voice was firm despite its weakness. Tomorrow you start working, reading, learning, talking to the people this system hurt. Don't come back until you understand what you're actually fighting for. It was a dismissal and a challenge. Trevor accepted both. As he left the hospice center, he saw news vans gathered outside. Rachel Harrison's article had published that morning, a 30,000-word investigation that was already being called the most important financial journalism of the decade. The headline read, "The Man Who Disappeared: How William Patterson's 32-year sacrifice exposed banking's darkest secret." Trevor pulled out his phone and read the article standing on the sidewalk. It was devastating, comprehensive, beautiful in its clarity and terrible in its truth. Rachel had found 12 additional victims beyond William's original 47. She'd interviewed them all, documented their stories, showed the human cost in excruciating detail. And she'd ended with William's current testimony, his declining health, his refusal to rest until the work was finished. The article was being shared millions of times. Senators were calling for hearings. The Justice Department had announced criminal investigations into 3 major financial institutions. State attorneys general were opening their own inquiries. The earthquake had begun. 3 weeks later, Trevor sat in a small community center in a neighborhood that had been devastated by predatory lending in the early 90s. He was there to listen, not to speak, to learn, not to teach. 15 people sat in a circle, survivors of the practices William had documented, their children, their grandchildren. Patricia had organized the meeting. She introduced Trevor simply. This is Trevor Blackwood. He benefited from the system that hurt us. He's here to understand what that means. For 3 hours, Trevor listened to stories that broke him. A woman named Denise talked about watching her mother die of stress-related heart failure 6 months after losing their home. She was 49 years old, healthy before the foreclosure. But the shame, the displacement, the constant moving, it killed her as surely as any disease. A man named Marcus described being 12 when his family was evicted. I watched them throw our furniture onto the street. My little sister's toys. My mother's wedding dress. Everything we owned just dumped on the curb like garbage. I'm 40 now, and I still have nightmares about it. A younger woman named Jasmine, whose grandmother had been victim number 33, explained how generational wealth works. My grandmother would have paid off that house. She would have left it to my mother. My mother would have left it to me. Instead, I'm 32 years old, working 2 jobs, renting a 1-bedroom apartment, with no path to ownership. That house was my inheritance. The bank didn't just steal from my grandmother. They stole from me, from my future children. Trevor absorbed every word, took notes, asked questions only when invited, and slowly began to understand that this wasn't about money, not really. It was about dignity, about the fundamental human need to build something that lasts, to leave something behind, to know your life mattered. After the meeting, Patricia walked him to his car. How do you feel? Destroyed, Trevor admitted, but in a way I needed. Good. That means you're ready to start. Patricia, I need to ask you something. Why are you helping me? I was part of the problem. I benefited while you suffered. Patricia considered the question. Because William asked me to, and because I've learned that anger without direction just burns you up from the inside. If I can redirect that energy toward actually changing things, toward preventing what happened to me from happening to others, then maybe all of it meant something. You're extraordinary. No, I am tired, but I'm still here. And as long as I'm still here, I might as well do something useful. She smiled. That's what William taught me. Being a victim doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes it means having the clearest view of what needs to change. At the federal building, Agent Morrison sat across from William for what they both knew would be one of the final interview sessions. He'd lost more weight. His skin had taken on a gray cast, but his mind remained sharp, his testimony unwavering. "Mr. Patterson, we have enough. You've given us everything we need for prosecution. You can stop now." "Almost done," William whispered. "Just need to walk you through the final connections. The shell companies they use to hide the profits. The offshore accounts. The lawyer networks that made it all seem legitimate." "Sir, you're exhausted. This can wait." "No." William's voice was firm despite its weakness. "It can't wait. I'm dying, Agent Morrison. Not eventually. Soon. And I need to know I've told you everything. Every detail. Every name. Every mechanism of harm. So that when I'm gone, you can finish this." Agent Morrison's eyes were wet. "We will. I promise you we will." "Good." William sagged back in his chair. "Then let's finish." They worked for another 2 hours. William explaining, Morrison recording, both of them racing against time that was running out. When they finally stopped, William asked, "How many people will face charges? Based on your testimony?" "At least 47 individuals, 15 institutions. Could be more as we investigate the connections." "And the victims?" "Your documentation has allowed us to identify over 300 people who were directly harmed. With further investigation, we expect that number to reach thousands." William nodded slowly. "Make sure they know it wasn't their fault. Whatever else you do, make sure they understand that." "We will." 2 weeks later, William Patterson died. It was peaceful, Patricia said. He was surrounded by the few people he'd allowed close in those final weeks. Patricia, Margaret, Trevor, Rachel Harrison. He'd spent the morning reading the news coverage of the first indictments being handed down. He'd smiled. Then he closed his eyes and simply stopped. The funeral was small. William had requested no publicity, no grand memorial. Just a quiet service for the people whose lives he'd directly touched. But outside the funeral home, hundreds of people gathered. Victims who'd been vindicated by his testimony. Journalists covering the ongoing investigations. Activists inspired by his sacrifice. They stood in silence as the service happened inside. Trevor spoke at the funeral, his voice breaking. "William Patterson gave me everything, and I gave him nothing. I didn't even give him respect when we first met. But he gave me anyway, because that's who he was. Someone who believed in second chances even when they weren't deserved." Margaret spoke too. "I was afraid for most of my life. Afraid to speak up, afraid to act, afraid to do what was right when it conflicted with what was safe. William showed me that fear is just another form of complicity. And that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means acting despite the fear." Patricia was the last to speak. "William told me once that he didn't disappear to punish the system. He disappeared to understand it, to live what he'd only observed before. And what he learned in 32 years on the streets was simple. The system doesn't fail by accident. It fails by design. And if it was designed, it could be redesigned." She looked out at the gathered faces. "So that's our job now. Those of us he left behind. We redesign it. We build something better. Not perfect. Nothing's perfect. But better. More just. More honest. That's how we honor him. Not with monuments or awards or praise. With action." The ceremony ended. William was buried in a simple grave with a simple headstone. William Patterson, 1947 to 2024, he chose truth. As people filtered out, Trevor stayed behind. He stood at the grave for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened, about the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. His phone buzzed. A message from Angela, his former assistant. The board just announced massive layoffs. 20% of staff, starting with people who supported you. Thought you should know. Trevor stared at the message, then at William's grave, then back at his phone. He typed a reply. "Tell everyone who's being let go to contact me. The Watchdog Fund is hiring. We need good people who actually care about doing right." He hit send. Then he called Patricia. "It's Trevor. I need your help putting together a team. William left me the fund, but I need people who actually understand what we're fighting for." Patricia's voice was warm. "I know exactly who to call." 6 months later, the Patterson Oversight Fund opened its doors. The offices were modest, deliberately so. Located in one of the neighborhoods that had been targeted by predatory lending, staffed primarily by people from affected communities. Trevor was listed as executive director, but the board was made up entirely of survivors and advocates. Their first action was to file a class action lawsuit against 3 major banks on behalf of over 5,000 victims. Their second was to establish a rapid response team to investigate complaints in real time. Their third was to begin working with legislators on comprehensive financial reform. The work was hard. Progress was slow. Institutions fought back with armies of lawyers and unlimited resources. But things were changing. Margaret Chun had become CEO of Wellstone Bank after the old board was forced to resign. Her first act was to establish the most comprehensive restitution program in banking history. Her second was to implement oversight mechanisms that gave community members direct input into lending practices. Other banks, seeing the writing on the wall, began similar reforms. Not out of goodness, out of fear. Fear that they'd be next. Fear that their dirty secrets would be exposed. Fear that they'd face the same reckoning Wellstone had faced. Fear, Trevor had learned, could be a tool for change too. Rachel Harrison won the Pulitzer Prize for her investigation. She used her acceptance speech to talk about her mother, about William, about the thousands of people whose suffering had finally been acknowledged. Trevor stood in the fund's conference room 1 year after William's death, looking at a wall covered in photos. William's original 47 victims. Rachel's additional 12. The 300 identified by federal investigators. And hundreds more who'd come forward since then. Each photo had a story. Each story had been heard. Not all had been resolved. Justice was complicated, incomplete, frustratingly slow. But they'd been heard. They'd been believed. They'd been told, it wasn't your fault. Patricia joined him at the wall. She moved slower now, her health declining. But her spirit remained fierce. He'd be proud, you know, she said. I don't know about that. Edo. Not because everything's fixed, but because we're still working, still trying, still refusing to let the comfortable silence return. Trevor nodded. I used to think success meant building an empire. Now I think it means tearing down the parts of the empire that were built on suffering. That's growth. It's late growth. I wasted a lot of years. Patricia smiled. William wasted 32 years, if you look at it one way. Or he spent 32 years learning exactly what needed to change. Perspective matters. They stood together in silence, looking at the faces on the wall. All those lives, all that stolen potential, all that delayed justice. Trevor's phone buzzed. A message from Agent Morrison. Final convictions came through. 42 guilty verdicts. Sentencing begins next month. He showed Patricia. She read it and nodded. Good. But that's not the real victory. What is? She pointed to a section of the wall where new photos had been added. Young people, children and grandchildren of the original victims. These kids, they're going to college on restitution funds. They're buying homes. They're starting businesses. They're building the futures that should have been their parents' and grandparents' birthright. She turned to Trevor. That's the real victory. Not punishment. Restoration. That evening, Trevor stood in his apartment, much smaller now than the penthouse he'd once owned. Most of his wealth had gone into the fund. He lived comfortably, but simply. He pulled out the letter William had written him, the one Patricia had delivered that first day. He read it again, as he did most nights. Wealth isn't what you keep. It's what survives you. Trevor thought about that, about William's wealth, not the money in frozen accounts, but the change he'd catalyzed. The victims vindicated. The systems reformed. The truth finally told. William Patterson had been a millionaire on paper, but his real wealth was measured in lives changed, justice restored, and a system pushed, however slowly, towards something better. Trevor opened his laptop and began drafting the fund's annual report. Not the financial numbers. Those would come later. This was the impact report. The stories of people helped, systems changed, progress made. He wrote about Maria Foster, who'd finally retired with dignity at 80 years old. About Patricia Holloway, who'd bought back her childhood home at auction and now ran workshops teaching people to recognize predatory practices. About Jerome Williams's daughter, who'd used her restitution settlement to open a community lending cooperative. He wrote about the 15 banks that had reformed their practices. The 12 new laws passed in various states. The federal oversight mechanism strengthened. He wrote about all of it because it mattered. Because remembering mattered. because telling these stories ensured they'd survive beyond the people who'd lived them. And as he wrote, Trevor finally understood what William had been trying to teach him that day in the bank. Success wasn't about accumulation. It was about contribution. Power wasn't about control. It was about enabling others. Wealth wasn't in bank accounts. It was in the lives you touched, and the changes you made, and the truth you refused to let die. The screen glowed in the darkening room. Outside, the city moved on, people rushing to dinner, to meetings, to lives they were building. Inside, Trevor typed the final sentence of the report. William Patterson spent 32 years homeless so that others might have homes. He gave away everything so that others might keep something. He disappeared so that truth might be found. And though he's gone, his work continues. In every victim vindicated, every system reformed, every person who looks at the powerless and sees their humanity instead of their appearance. This is his legacy. This is his wealth. And it will never be frozen again. Trevor hit save. Then he closed his laptop, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. In the morning, there would be more work. More victims to help. More institutions to hold accountable. More progress to fight for. But tonight he rested, just like William finally could. The balance had been checked and found wanting. And slowly, painfully, gloriously, it was being corrected. When you see someone society has made invisible, do you laugh at the crowd? Or do you stop to wonder what truth they might be carrying that could change everything? If this story made you think differently about who holds real power, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know.